Moving to Live is a podcast about movement and exercise. Along with our sister podcast, FitLab PGH, we have the ethos that movement is a lifestyle, not just an activity, because movement is part of what makes your life complete. Moving to Live interviews professionals in the movement field who have a variety of experiences, education, and professional titles. At the end of the day, we all want to move more, and we want our patients, athletes, or clients to move more or move better, more efficiently, or move with less pain. Some of the people we interview you will have heard of. They're well known in and outside of the movement and exercise professions. Others you may not have heard of, but they have a great deal of knowledge to share. Many people doing the best work spend their time working with people, not working on their social media presence. Each Moving to Live interview will be long enough to impart usable information, but short enough to be able to be consumed in a single listen during your workout, commute, or even during dinner prep. Before we get to the interview, a quick request. If you like what you hear, please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts and share the podcast with your friends or anyone who understands that movement is a lifestyle. We appreciate it, and our guests appreciate it too. Welcome back to another edition of Moving to Live. As you heard in the intro, along with our sister podcast, FitLab Pittsburgh, our ethos is movement is a lifestyle, not just an activity. We really want to make it the idea that movement should be more normal, not abnormal. And we pick guests that have interesting stories. In some cases, I pick them out by surfing the internet. In other cases, they are people that I've known either for a short time or a long time. And I don't know if today's guest remembers when we first met, but it was sometime in the early 2000s at the NSCA Personal Trainers Conference in, I believe, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I know he has done some work with cycling. If I remember correctly, he's lived all over the Southeast, someplace in the Midwest, Kansas, Nebraska, or someplace like that, spent some time in California. And now he is working at the University of Illinois, Chicago. We're talking today with Josh Miller, who is a clinical associate professor in the Department of Kinesiology and Nutrition. But I think he's a little bit more than that. Josh, thanks for taking time to talk to Moving to Live.
My pleasure, Ben. Thanks so much. And actually, I've lived in 8 states since we probably first met.
And as I said, it was back in the 2000s. And I think in that time you were in the Atlanta, Georgia or Athens, Georgia area doing something. It was probably a blast from the past for some listeners with Jelly Belly Cycling.
Actually, it was Jittery Joe's.
I apologize to the coffee people.
Yeah, I was actually helping out with a friend of mine who unfortunately is no longer with us, Dr. Michael Ross, who was one of the team physicians. And we did some stress testing and exercise testing of the team prior to the season. So it was really a lot of fun to work with the guys.
And my question I always like to start out with Moving to Live is, you're in the elevator gets trapped and you get to talking and somebody says, what do you do? What's your, in a positive way, 30-second elevator spiel, or maybe it's a little longer, a little shorter. Who are you?
Who am I? Not that simple to answer anymore, I guess. But pretty much I am a exercise physiologist who has worked in the field in pretty much every aspect except really with kids. I've worked with active duty soldiers, inactive soldiers due to injuries, due to spinal cord injury. I've worked in professional athletics with cycling teams. I've taught. I have actually worked in cardiac rehab, pulmonary rehab, worked in hospital-based wellness where I was actually a hospital coach to get people well. I worked in corporate wellness for a brief period of time with Motorola back in my graduate studies. And my first job was actually working with senior citizens as a fitness instructor at Century Village in good old Pembroke Pines, Florida. On top of other things I've done.
I'm sure at some point in time you've had a student that says, well, Dr. Miller, you just don't know what it's like in the real world. And in actuality, you do. So I'm curious, starting out, I mean, in order to stay in exercise physiology or exercise science or the movement field for a fair amount of time, over 20 years, you have to have at least some enjoyment of movement. So I always like to find out, were you an active kid? And if you were, was it because mom and dad said, get the heck out of the house? Or was it because mom and dad were active? Or was movement something you found later, maybe in college?
Actually, growing up, I don't know how many people remember back in the heydays of the 70s, soda came out in 1-liter bottles. And my dad used to actually drink 2 of those a night. And just to give you an idea, I'm 6 foot, my dad's 5'8.5". So he was a little obese at the time, and quit drinking soda and started running. And I thought, hey, if dad can do that, I can do that. So at 5 years old, I actually stopped drinking soda. And to this day, I'm 48 now. It's been 43 years since I've had a soda. But I actually grew up playing a lot of sports. I played soccer for about 13 seasons, got unfortunately sick my last season, ended up in the hospital with pneumonia and kind of got a little nervous. So they said no more of that and got into bowling. I know what a weird sport that is. Did that for a little bit and then got into weight training for a while. But I've always been pretty active. I try to be active. I'm an asthmatic to begin with. So I find that being active, especially with an underlying lung disease, definitely is really important for someone like myself.
And I know my joke is always that I was going to be a marine biology major in college or an athletic training major. And then I took a marine biology class and hated it. When you went to college, was there an easy decision to major? What did you major in? And was it an easy decision, or was it something you kind of fell in and said, hey, this might be something I can do?
I actually started out as a biology major because I was thinking of going to medical school. And after graduation, my associate's degree, I started my bachelor's program. And one day I sat before class and said, wait a second, are doctors really going to be making the same money that they're making now? And I'm like, probably not. I'm going to be $250,000 in debt. Am I ever going to get out from under it? And I quit school, actually, for about 2 years, worked in the real world. I worked in retail, hated it, and got a great opportunity to go back to school and found exercise physiology, which allowed me to do the things I wanted to do in medical school, but not be $250,000 in debt. So I got an opportunity and started back up in the fall of '96 at FAU, find another university down in good old Boca Raton, Florida, and finished up my bachelor's degree and worked in the research lab for the summer and got a free ride on my graduate program. And then moved out to Nebraska for a doctorate, actually.
And it's always easier to justify, or maybe not justify, but say, I think I want to continue my education if you don't have to worry about going more into debt.
Very much so. Yeah, it's very important. And I always try to tell my students that if you pay for it, you better start appreciating it, because what you don't want to do is take the same class 3 times and have to pay for it 3 times. So put in what you get, put in everything you get to do for it, and you'll be a better student and a better person for it.
And I know there's 2 groups of people probably are listening to this. They heard you talk about going to school in Florida, and they think, how the heck could he actually leave there? And then there's other people like me who didn't grow up in Florida, lived in Florida for a while, and knew literally as soon as the moving truck pulled into the house that I purchased that this is not a lifetime where I want to be here, because I don't like hot and humid weather. And actually, since moving in the Pittsburgh area, 50% of the people, when they hear where I used to live 15 plus years ago in Florida, say, how could you ever leave? And the other 50% are like, oh, I can see why you got out. When you finished with the master's program, I know there's a number of doctoral programs in the state of Florida. Was it a conscious choice of saying, I want to get out of Florida? Was it a conscious choice of beginning to say, this is the sort of doctoral program I want, which is why you went farther west? Or was there another reason?
The main reason was my neighbor in the office happened to be Dr. Lee Brown. And one day he came to me and said, hey, I got a friend that's looking for some doctoral students. You interested in moving to Nebraska? You get a free ride, and it's a good program. And I ended up heading out to Nebraska to study with Terry Hausch for about 3 years. The program underwent some changes. I actually quit the program about 3 classes shy with my dissertation, and started work back in the real world again. And it took me about another 8 years, actually almost 10 years. And I went back to school and finished up my doctorate in 2014.
And I know you mentioned a few minutes ago, the finding exercise science gave you the opportunity to do the things that a physician would do, or some of the things that a physician would do without that tremendous debt load. Very often I know the common is, and I think you can probably appreciate this, very often the people who finish the doctorate aren't necessarily the smartest people. No offense to any of my friends who have doctorates, including you, but it's the people who just put their heads down and persevere, whether it's the first time they go or whether they leave and then subsequently come back. What was the decision after working that you said, I want to go back and finish that doctorate versus that's a separate phase of my life?
I always wanted to teach. And while I was working in the field, whether we were in different states with different jobs, I actually got opportunities to adjunct and realized I really enjoyed it. And I had a great opportunity to do so at my last job, I was working with doing some military research up in Washington State and with the U.S. Army. And I kind of was realizing this isn't really where I wanted to be. And a friend of mine told me about the school I went to. It was AT Still. It was an online doctoral program. And it gave me a great opportunity not only to study online, but still work full time. And the funny part was I actually took a full-time job with AT Still for 3 years where I actually finished up my doctorate. So I was actually working at the medical school in Arizona. So needless to say, another bright, sunny state and hot. But it was a great opportunity to meet a lot of people within the field and work with a lot of up-and-coming doctors and get a better education also, I thought, too.
Any thoughts now that you have a doctorate and are embedded in the teaching that, maybe I shouldn't have done this. I should have stayed in the more practical aspect, whether it was research or personal training or fitness?
No, I actually, I got into personal training a little bit. I guess for me, a lot of the clients I worked with wanted more of a psychologist, and I didn't really enjoy that aspect of it. But I like people. I try to meet people, work with people. I enjoyed especially the disease orientation. So a lot of my interest was with cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, metabolic disease in that sense. And just having that opportunity to work with people is great. But one thing I really enjoy with the students is actually helping them with the next generation. Teaching them and bringing forth what I knew and all the opportunities I had to demonstrate to them that there's more than one thing that they can do in the field and enjoy it.
And I think that's something that sometimes when you teach in the field, that is undersold as far as, many students, at least from that I've talked to, it's like, well, I'm going to major in this and there's only one or two avenues that I can go. And I know when I went back to school, I'm a little bit older than you or not. When I went back to school, when I started school, as I said, I was either going to be a marine biology major or an athletic training student. And I remember I became exposed to athletic training because of an injury in high school. And the gentleman who is an athletic trainer and a physical therapist that I went to at the sports medicine clinic said, don't become an athletic trainer, become a physical therapist. And I think at that time, I didn't really know what an athletic trainer was. I didn't know what a physical therapist was. And I think given your vast, and I don't say this lightly, variety of job experiences, many people don't realize all of the things that they can do. And I think one of the things you described is being in the research field. And I'm curious, when you were doing research, was that postdoctorate, or is this you worked as a research person while you only had a master's?
I was actually working with just a master's degree. So my first real research position was with the U.S. Veterans Affairs Administration. So I was actually based in Richmond, Virginia, working at a spinal cord injury research lab. And when I actually got hired, I was the first person hired for the lab. So my job was actually to take the monies that were allocated and buy pretty much all the equipment. So it was having a nice blank check of $100,000 to spend on all the equipment that you could think of. And working in spinal cord injury, it was much different than the traditional ambulatory idea. I walked in thinking person with a spinal cord injury won't be able to walk. So it was very enhancing to learn that actually there are different degrees of spinal cord injuries and people can actually walk. So we got to work with a lot of active duty soldiers that were injured in Afghanistan and Iraq due to, unfortunately, IED explosions. I had one who happened to be a lieutenant colonel that suffered a parachute injury. His chute didn't open, or I should say it opened up, but a little close to the ground, and thankfully the trees slowed him down, but he had a spinal cord injury. I worked with some other soldiers that were actually active duty that had traumatic brain injuries. So we were actually the closest facility to Washington, D.C. that we would actually get a lot of dignitaries come through. So it was really nice to actually meet a lot of the active duty soldiers and work with them. After that, I actually took a job with the Henry Jackson Foundation, which is a military grant foundation that procures research grants for different individuals that want to work with active duty soldiers. So I actually got to work with 1,500 active duty soldiers in Washington State. We were actually based at Madigan. And the interesting thing was we were actually working with Pat Tillman's Ranger Battalion. So it was really neat to actually have that opportunity to work with these guys. And it was definitely a lot of fun. But like I said, it was after a while, I kind of said, there's got to be more to this. And that's kind of why I kind of got out of research.
And you ever regret the path you took, saying out of research, more into academics, where there's some research, but also the teaching aspect?
No, actually, I think the academics is a lot more secure currently. One thing you have to worry about research is that you have to find money for it. And if you're not a top name in the field, you might not get the big research grants. And that may limit how much you can actually do. And working at an academic university, the position I am is basically more of a teaching position. It gives me the opportunity to teach students as well as perform research, but I'm not required to produce a research line as much as a tenured line faculty does.
And I know depending on the university, there can be a pretty intensive research component that's just assumed or required. I know a colleague of mine once applied for a job at a university, which I won't name because I don't think they're atypical, but he was told that within a year and a half, it was expected that he would be bringing in 1.5 to 2.5 times his salary. And that's a big responsibility. And it's the reason that he didn't take the job, even though it was offered, is like, I don't want to be responsible for people where if I don't get a specific grant through no fault of my own, maybe the funding dries up. There are other people who are out of a job because they were relying on me to fund them.
It is very scary. And that was one of the reasons why I left the VA, because the grant actually ended and there was no added money at that present time. So you get a little worried that does happen. And I feel much more secure knowing that my job is more teaching and research is a secondary part to it.
And I know I'm here in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, and there are quite a few people who have been born and raised in the Pittsburgh area. Maybe they left for a few years and then they came back. And whenever they meet me, it's not atypical for them to hear us like, well, why did you come to Pittsburgh? And I know I was always taught by my dad. It's like, look, one of the important things is to have a job, and you may have to move to have a job. And I think you mentioned you were in 11 different eight different states. And before I ended up here, I know I counted, and at one point, since I had graduated from high school, I had lived in 13 different places. So literally, including growing up here where I am now, this is the longest. This is my 17th year here. This is the longest I've lived in one place in my life. How was it with the different jobs and the things like that? How difficult was it to literally move across the country, or was your attitude kind of similar to what mine was?
I'm pretty easy with that. My wife is not. She's not a very adaptable person. It takes her a little bit to adapt to a new spot. But over the years, we ended up moving for my career and my job, so it was a little bit easier in that sense. But many of the states that we moved to, we didn't have family or friends, so that became a little bit more difficult. And we looked into the community and tried to do different things, but I've come to the realization that my best friend is my wife, and we have a lot of fun together, and that's the most important. And especially being under lockdown, I've certainly come to understand my wife a lot better and have a lot more fun now with her, I think, than we ever had in the past.
And I know with COVID going on, we are, I think, here in the Pittsburgh area, I think I first became aware of it or started taking it seriously the 12th or 13th of March of 2020, when I went to see a physician and actually talked to him about it just as a side conversation. as you know, my main job is I teach online and I teach from home, and I've done that for umpteen years since I've been in this area. But I know for many people in academia and other professions, their life was completely disrupted. Their jobs were completely disrupted. You were mentioning one of the things you like about academics is the fact that there's a little bit more security. I'm always curious when I talk to people during COVID, when was the first time you realized this was going to significantly change the way you did things professionally? And anything looking back you wish you'd done differently or you'd recognized and kind of adapted sooner professionally?
I think I found out probably like spring break. We were still here in Chicago, starting to go back and forth, and the idea was we weren't sure what the school was going to do. They were talking about shutting down, and actually they shut us down probably the week of spring break, and then gave us an extra week to prepare for everything moving online. So we went from 1 week, the prior week meeting in class to the following week meeting online. And it certainly changed the environment. I had courses that had students greater than 100, two courses that actually had, one course had 125 students in it. The other course had 200 students in it. And I tried to make them go synchronously, and it just didn't work very well. So following it up in the fall, we actually moved into asynchronous classes. And I think that worked out, but probably being a better user of Blackboard or the learning management systems, as well as understanding how to videotape and record and come up with better ideas of class projects. That was probably the hardest thing. I probably think it still is, especially even now that I'm teaching still online. I think I'm getting better, but probably by the time I get decent, we're going to be back in the classroom.
In no way would I say I'm decent. I think it's always a learning process. And each year you learn more things and realize, wow, why didn't I know that? I know when I first started teaching online that people that I would meet at conferences, and you may have even said this too, it's like, how does this work? And I've seen a transition over 10 years or so where people are doing it somewhat, but there still is a big a switch. I know last March or so, I had 5 or 6 of my colleagues across the country at different times call me and say, hey, what do I do? Or what are your 2 or 3 best suggestions? What was your background with online education or teaching online before all this happened? Did you have any background, or was this, holy crap, I'm jumping into it?
Well, teaching wise, none. Maybe just setting up a Blackboard page just for the students to download information. But my doctorate, like I said, was actually 100% online. So I had experience that way. Other than that, grad school, I had 2 online statistics courses that, in my opinion, didn't go well, but it was basically because our teacher liked to take time off from teaching. So we'd put in all our documentation, and it'd be like 6 weeks later that we'd actually hear back from him. So that was probably the first experience. But overall, I think our experience is getting a little better. The school was really good with giving us a lot of videos, trainings, helping out in that sense. But it's still an ever moving idea of teaching online that I don't think will ever be 100% perfect. But if we can at least maybe not have the hiccup of not having to worry about when to open a module in that sense and know the exact date works right, I think that's going to be the most important thing for me to learn.
I know some of the people I've talked to, just both in offices who work quote unquote real jobs, and people in academia, they said, my life has changed forever. I mean, I know some offices, they're not going back. They're going to be virtual, or people are going to work from home forever. I know some people I've talked to in academia have said, some things are going to change forever with this. Even when we're back in the classroom, I can see that there are some things that we shouldn't be or don't have to be in the classroom. I was talking to somebody who said, one of the things they want to do is, and their department is looking at doing, is having one day on campus where they do all labs, for example. So there's a lab day for the department for all of the labs. I'm curious, as you are coming up on, within a month or so, a year of having done this, once this ends and we get back to what theoretically is normal, but it'll be different, where you actually go into the classroom, do you see your classes to some extent, or has there been talk in your department or your college that some things are still going to stay online just because they found it works better than the face-to-face?
I don't think we've actually really we started maybe talking about it a little bit, but I don't think anything's been set in stone. I think what I might do is use some material online, and some still in the classroom. So do a little bit of a hybridized approach, especially maybe with the grad students rather than my undergrad students. But I think it's a great opportunity to utilize both platforms, because I think students, no matter what, some need that tactile sense. They need the classroom, need a desk. They need to hear it rather than watching it on a video or reading it in a book. I mean, one thing I've certainly been doing a heck of a lot is reading. I set a goal every day, 10 minutes on my iPad. And literally since March, I've read, up until December 31st, I read 30 books on my iPad. Actually 24, and then 5 or 6 in my hand that I can actually physically touch. And honestly, I think it's a better idea. It's helped me become, I think, a little bit better at what I do, and understanding a little bit more about the student, I think, a little bit more too.
You miss now, with almost a year being in the classroom versus basically logging on and seeing students, if it happens to be synchronous, although now it's asynchronous, seeing students maybe as an emoji or a symbol on the computer screen?
Many times I see a blank screen with their name on it, because it's 8:00 in the morning. I think many of them just woke up, so they don't want to show their bedhead. But I miss seeing the students in the classroom. I think a lot of them miss that idea too, and I think it helps us all to just have that sense that we're near somebody again, rather than maybe the person that's in your house, because I'm sure after a while they drive you nuts or you drive them nuts, and you can only hide so many places in an apartment or a house before they find you.
And I know it's very easy, especially with what's going on, to just think that you're in your own little microcosm, and this is affecting you, and it's only you. I know you and I were talking beforehand, and I mentioned that I've had the opportunity to build mountain bike trails, and you and your wife have essentially been stuck in your house, although I'm assuming you leave to grocery shop and to get gas, etc. How has that gone? Because I think one of the things people forget is most of us who work in exercise science or movement, we like to move. And I mean, I know when I went to my doctoral studies, my mentor, Dr. Jeff Chandler, told my advisor, which I found out later, look, if Ben's ever a jerk, just tell him to go out for a run or a bike ride, and he's going to be a lot easier to deal with. And as I've gotten older, I found, if I don't get that 40 to 60 minutes most days of the week, I'm a real bear to be with. And it's actually worked out well for me, because if my dogs don't get 40 to 60 minutes, they're tearing up the house. So today is our easy day. So we're not going to get that. But I'm curious for you, and you said you're stuck in the house. I know you're a cyclist. How has this worked out with you as far as personally and maintaining a positive attitude?
I've actually been riding on the trainer. One of my first big purchases I made when moving here to Chicago was actually buying a Wahoo kicker. The reason I did was because as I told you, I actually got hit by a car a couple of years ago, and my wife doesn't really like me riding too much on the street. And also, it's about 30 miles to the city, so it's a little bit harder for me to get to the offices like I used to. So I bought the trainer, and I actually ride indoors most of the time, unless the weather's a little bit nicer. Now it's starting to flurry, so I won't be going out. But I enjoy. I'm one of those, like, you can put me on the kicker, and I can sit on it for a couple of hours with no problem. But I do miss being outdoors. Like I said, I do have an underlying lung disease. So my fear and my wife's fear is that I could catch COVID. So it's keeping me indoors so that I don't get it. So hopefully Friday, fingers crossed, as long as the weather's good, I'll be heading to the city for my first dose of the vaccination. And that will help. But, you never know. And I know what the idea of shortness of breath, fatigue, having been a asthma sufferer for my entire life, I understand that. So it's don't want to deal with that anymore, I should say. So I'll make sure to take my meds and do everything that I have to do in that sense.
And I know one of the things I've said to a number of people is, It's not so much at least for me as an active person, it's not so much the fear of getting COVID, it's the fear of having compromised lung function. And it sounds like, as somebody who has compromised function as an asthmatic, that's something that you're very cognizant of.
Yes, I moving here or moving to any new place, there's always the acclimation to the new environment. So I ended up going to a pulmonologist, and normally my maximum amount of air that I can blow out in one breath, forced vital capacity, is about 5 liters. I was in an episode and I was pushing it about 3.5 liters. So needless to say, new medication helps. And hopefully getting used to the environment helps also. But the idea of catching COVID, it's more of the fear of the long term. I think that's really what we're probably going to end up as an exercise physiologist. We're probably going to deal with those individuals that have long-term issues related to lung, heart, metabolic diseases, such like that. That's going to become the limiting factor of why they're not exercising like they used to.
And I know I was talking to a physician of mine that I see for an eye problem. He mentioned he had it in March, and it was literally until June or July till he felt comfortable doing light aerobic exercise. And he was excited because he was able to go skiing and actually ski, even though he said, I'm really out of shape. But he said there was some time there where he wasn't sure that would be an option. And he was a little concerned because, as part of the enjoyment for many people in life is the opportunity or the ability to move and do what they love to do, whether it's skiing or hopping on the Wahoo kicker.
Yeah, it's when we lived in California, we used to head to the mountains and hike. So hopefully once the weather settles and the whole situation settles, my wife and I will head out to nearby, maybe Wisconsin, and do some hiking out there, or maybe go upstate up into upper Illinois for some of the mountains. I think there are mountains. I'm not very good at that stuff. But having fun with that, because she's also a very outdoor person, and we enjoy getting out there, doing some hiking and doing some trails and such. Not a skier.
We've been talking.
A scary thing for me.
Well, I have standing offers from people to teach me how to ski, and my go-to answer is, I have enough expensive hobbies with cycling, and that I really don't want to take on another one. We've been talking with Dr. Josh Miller. He is an exercise physiologist. He's had an interesting career path, and I think it's always interesting to hear from people who have a different path than maybe most people have. And I think it's fair to say that his career path, as he shared with us, is somewhat atypical, and it lets you know that there are a variety of career options, and there are interesting career options. Josh, I want to thank you for taking time to talk to Moving2Live.
Thanks, Ben. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Moving2Live. Make sure you check out the show notes for contact information for our latest guest, as well as links about the things we talked about. Intro and exit music is Traveling Light by Jason Shaw. You can subscribe to Moving2Live wherever you find podcasts or on our website, www.moving2live.com. Please tell your friends about Moving2Live and check out our sister podcast, FitLab PGH, FITLABPGH.com, which focuses on people, businesses, events, and activities in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area that make movement a priority, because movement is a lifestyle, not just an activity. Until next time, keep on moving.